the ERF-3 program from the California Interagency Council of Homelessness for the Salinas River Soledad Encampment. So I will turn this over to Megan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members. I'm going to have Darlene bring up the PowerPoint presentation. I did also want to acknowledge that Roxanne Wilson, who's the Homeless Services Director, is also on the line and able to make comments, I will invite her to make some comments at the end. I worked with Roxanne before. She used to be the Executive Director of the Coalition for Homeless Services Providers and has been working with the county, I think, for the better part of more than a year, and has been doing a lot. I think the county has kind of focused more than it ever has on the provision of homeless services and getting resources, especially to South County. I think looking to make sure that that all the resources aren't concentrated in Salinas or in the peninsula. So I just wanted to provide a little overview. This is an item for consideration and feedback direction. I should start by saying that the actual applicant for the Encampment Resolution grant would not be the city, but would be the county. And we're looking to partner with the county because we feel that the success of this Encampment Resolution funding program, if awarded, really depends on cooperation, not only between the two jurisdictions, but also service providers that would be attached to a grant if awarded. So in 2022, the state established the Encampment Resolution Fund. They're now on perhaps the third and last round of funding for this purpose. The reason for the Encampment Resolution Fund is to actually assist local jurisdictions in ensuring the safety and wellness of encampments, resolving the critical concerns of the surrounding community, and actually transitioning these individuals into safe and stable housing, and using a data-informed, coordinated approach to encampment concerns. And this means, actually doing a census of who's in the encampment and to work with individuals one by one to actually result in permanent housing. So the third round of Encampment Resolution funding, the window for applying is on February 1st. So the county is hoping to submit an application on January 31st. The county has has hired a grant writer to help them with the report, and this is an individual who has been successful in working with other jurisdictions to receive funding, and has stressed that the likelihood of an application receiving funding, if it's submitted after February 1st, is very low. So she basically has told us we have to move forward. I'm sorry, if you don't mind going back. We haven't finalized the budget yet. It's still under development, but we're probably looking in the $4 to $6 million range. And when I say we, I really mean the county, because the county would be the lead applicant. But because we're in conversation with them, I feel it's a we. So when I say we, I mean really the county. Okay, next slide. So the purpose of and what Encampment Resolution funds can be used for is pretty broad. It can be used for rapid rehousing. It can be used for operating subsidies for any type of shelter or interim housing. It can be used for street outreach. It can be used for coordination of services, so providing system support, delivery, actually building or acquiring permanent housing, prevention and diversion, that means preventing someone who's at risk for becoming homeless, interim sheltering, improvements to existing systems, and administrative costs. And really what it is again, it's resolving the critical issues of an encampment, demonstrating that there is a large encampment and showing how you're going to resolve those issues. Next slide. So as I stated before, we're looking to get council consideration of joining in partnership with the county. The county CAO's office, which is the chief administrative officer, and it would be the lead, and they have taken on homelessness at that level to make sure that there's a better coordination of resources across the departments. We would be working, again, like I said, directly with Homeless Services Director, who's online. And I kind of talked a little bit about what the purpose of the Encampment Resolution Funding, which is to literally address this encampment so that in the future we don't have an encampment right at our city door. There was a meeting on November 29th. Monterey County did an input session on homelessness. About 30 participated. That input session was at the community center in Soledad, and many of the folks mentioned specifically this encampment and working to address the needs at the encampment. The county also has conducted an online survey, and a lot of people in that survey have responded that there's additional needs and services in South County. And then CSU MB, the CHE program, has done outreach to the encampment, along with, I must admit, our police department and our fire, Cal Fire have been out there numerous times. They know the individuals, and we kind of know what we're talking about. Many of the people who have been talked to directly have indicated that they are interested in assistance and help. Next. So the proposed use of funds for this particular project really stem along street outreach. So that would be to continue to engage the folks that are in the encampment, case management of the encampment, residents understanding what the shortcomings are of their needs to get housing and to get services. Could be transportation, could be they don't have IDs, so that would result in health support and access and basic needs support. So literally it could be the case manager help someone go to DMV to get the license they need in order to put in an application for housing. Housing navigation, again, is actually literally helping people with their housing goals and helping them apply for housing opportunities, get rental subsidies. Landlord incentives would be to provide a landlord incentive who may be uncomfortable housing someone who is coming especially directly from homelessness. So it could be providing double deposits, and then rental subsidy would be, as it sounds, rent. And then lastly, administration is obviously a small component of what the grant would also be used for, because there are staff requirements. But lastly, the conversation that I wanted to bring up here is there needs to be a component of interim housing. And the reason why we need to kind of think this through is to address the encampment under a decision Boise, the Boise decision, in order to kind of enforce no camping in public areas, you need to have some options of where people can go. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, go back one. Just as an FYI, California has actually had success with the Encampment Resolution program, and has contributed a considerable amount, $715 million, and has removed 5,679 encampments and has helped an estimated 23,000 people out of encampment. So we've seen success in this effort. Okay, next. So I just wanted to go over, in the proposal, we do need to outline how we're going to address housing for the encampment residents. And there are 3 options to consider, and they all have pros and cons. I think what I'm seeking is a permission or, approval of working with the county on this effort, but also some direction on interim housing options. Option 1 would be looking at our local motels and getting a lease for about 20 to 24 local motel rooms. The pros are it's a fast ramp up. It would be a lower initial cost than building interim housing. The cons are that we really only have 2 hotels in our town. There's a high occupancy rate. It could result in loss of TOT revenue, which is pretty significant for our city. And then there's some concern about mixing encampment residents with visitors, whether or not that would generate a lot more calls to police and fire, and if it's harder for them to monitor. Of course, they will always do their best to respond to calls and help out with that. The next option, number 2. A second option is we could do an interim housing option at 990 Los Coches Road. We show where that is on the map. The pros are it's a little bit easier for the PD and CAL FIRE to manage and monitor. If they do get service calls, they're always going to the same, or not always, but the calls will be to that location. It is temporary and removable. The location is fairly removed from sensitive areas, and the zoning wouldn't allow for that to be a permanent housing site. So, again, it would be temporary. The cons is it requires a lot of site improvements. It's going to be expensive for initial setup, and will tax some of the service resources, and there's a longer lead time before it can be used. So, you might be having people still in the encampment for a year before this is ready to go. Okay, next. And then option 3 is essentially leaving the encampment more or less in place, doing a good job of identifying who's in the encampment today, and not really allowing more people to come into the encampment, and focus on mostly directly housing people to permanent housing from the encampment. The pros are that more resources go to the solution, more resources go to case management services. We do have actually many encampment residents who are probably pretty close to housing ready, and some even have assigned vouchers. And we have a fairly robust housing pipeline. The cons are that the encampment would remain until we've been able to pluck through all of the residents who have been housed. The encampment residents are still vulnerable to the flooding and displacement because many of them are private property. So a private property owner could enforce their rules. One thought is if option 3 is the option, that there still may be some level of motel vouchers to allow for, if we have some people in the flood areas or whatever, we could still shift some people to the motel areas or people who might be harder to place into housing. And the next slide. Really the recommendation is we're hoping that council sees that this is a good opportunity to partner with the county so that they can apply for the funding and we can make sure that the program is implemented in a way that doesn't negatively impact the city and is successful. And we're looking for some direction on the interim housing options. And with that, I wanted to see if we could, if Mayor's okay, Roxanne Wilson is online from the county, if she could make a few comments as well.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. I truly appreciate this opportunity to present this collaboration on resolving the encampment that has impacted the surrounding communities for too long. And most importantly, the opportunity to serve the people who are experiencing homelessness in our shared jurisdictions. As mentioned, the county deployed outreach to meet the occupants and get an understanding of how they fell into homelessness and if they were even interested in resolving it. And through that engagement, we have learned that the vast majority of the occupants have fallen into homelessness due to unresolvable issues with their families. But they are very much interested in housing, and they also want to help us build a program that would be most impactful for program participants. We heard earlier your new director say that small community superpower is collaboration. And I would like to emphasize that in my experience, the most effective programs are done in partnership and in collaboration with relevant stakeholders, including people with lived experience. Not one entity has enough resources and capacity to do this alone, but together we can certainly go far. I thank the city for your commitment to this social issue, which you demonstrated when you adopted the Leave Me Home 5-year plan to address homelessness. And also through all of the various meetings that I've had with your chief and your city manager, your staff there are incredible, incredible people. While we can't guarantee that this proposal will be funded by the state, we do know that all of the steps that we are taking here today shows the commitment and collaboration that the state is looking for. And also the 3 options that were presented to the council are proven models that have been funded in previous rounds of encampment resolution funding. We're considering the 7 principles to address encampments that was published by the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness just 2 years ago. And we've also leveraged the expertise of many other jurisdictions. So again, I thank you so much for your time. I'm honored to have this time with you. And I'm here to answer any questions you have regarding the 3 proposed structures or even like examples or my experience with encampment resolution funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you for all the work that you've done as your, now with the county, obviously in the small time that you've been there, a lot of changes, but also as part of your role as executive director for the Coalition of Homeless Service Providers. Extraordinary work on this front, so thank you so much. Okay, so with that, let me take it out to the public to see if...
Thank you. Wes Wyatt, Salinas Monterey County Homeless Union co-president. And I'm a little concerned about the way this is going. I mean, I want to make sure that there's a 100% success rate for everybody in the encampment being placed in the housing or whatever, so that you don't have them just going somewhere else and then going, well, you can't be here either. Stopping the cycle is certainly the biggest issue. So the success rate of how it went in Salinas that I know of in the Encampment Resolution Fund, the first time was 25 out of 27 people. But then there was one in Car Lake and nobody was placed and $8 million went to the ground, the land, the contractors. So I just want to make sure that people are being placed and the money is actually being used in a positive direction.
Yeah, thank you, Roseanne and Megan, for the presentation. Unfortunately, we are in a state that, not just literally the state of California, but a state of situation where homelessness is occurring in all communities, and therefore the need to address it. Having previous experience in working with the homeless population and overlooking many homeless or programs from Monterey County, actually from South Santa Clara County down to Ventura County, to include Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and those areas as well. It's something that's not going away. But how do we address it, and how do cities and counties address this so that we meet the needs? There's a need out there, but it's simply not just a need of housing. The individuals that are needing of these, that are homeless, that need the housing, also have other issues as far as mental health issues, substance abuse issues, health issues that need to be addressed as well. And so therefore, having to be able to facilitate that and provide that to is very complex and costly within itself, and to ensure that all these services, which we tend to call wraparound services, are available, just not only the housing portion of it. And the other part of it is that the individual, my experience has been as well, is that many times individuals that are homeless don't want to move into that housing because of the fact of the rules, the restrictions that are placed for them to be there. So it's a complex issue. At least we're looking to address presently our situation. And although the encampment actually is in the county on private property, right? So Boise versus Martin doesn't really apply to us. It's not that I know of, just because of the fact it's not the cities, and the county would be the one obligated to find placement for them. Now, if those individuals moved into the city, that'd be a different story as well. But nonetheless, it still needs to be addressed because it is, our services are going out there, our police department, our fire department are having to address those issues. Our city staff are dealing with those as well. And so myself, I believe there was, Roxanne, if I may, wasn't there a census done today on a county?
Point in time count, it's not.
Yeah, it's
It wasn't
not,
today, it's next week?
it's on January 31st.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping we were gonna get good numbers, because originally, there were 12, and I know, when it first started, and my understanding is it's up to 30, 35 now. So, and it seems as though, did ours grow, or did other people move into that encampment? We don't know until the census is done, and obviously get an opportunity to talk to the individuals that are impacted by the homelessness. And so, looking at an option of the three of them, I hate to see us tie down our property there, where we're expanding our retail base and limiting that property on Los Coches, because one, we're have the marketplace right there. Two, we have limited spaces for retail to build a temporary, or what would you call it, an encampment village for the homeless. So we'd be locking down that property for a little bit of time, whether it's temporary, a year or more, might limit us in our ability to meet the needs of a potential employer or retail business that wanted to be placed there. Also, it's in close proximity to the older part of town, which is 8th Street. You just cross the tracks over right there, you're in 8th Street. And I understand that there's going to be, in this program, there'll be security, there'll be caseworkers, but they're still free to, and obviously they're free to come and go as they please. So we need to address that as well, because we see it already on over at the marketplace. They're CVS, and majority of them tend to not bother anybody, but there are the few that are bothering people. So I would like to see something where we find something that we're able to deal with the issue of our people that are displaced and are in need of some help, and to help them, but also at the same time recognizing the other the other needs of the city and the other citizens in our community as well. So those are my thoughts, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Councilwoman Corralejo?
Yes, first of all, I wanted to thank Roxanne and Megan for all the work that went into this, and also the chief and both of our chiefs over there. I'm sure both of you had a lot of input for her. And I actually wanted to request that I could get the slideshow emailed to me, please. There was a lot of good information on there, so thank you for that. For me, I'm happy to see that we're doing something, that we have some kind of plan, or at least we have the conversation going. To me, it really stood out when we did the first, there was like a workshop that we did where we invited the community. I don't recall if Megan was with us. I think it was Ed, because I think he left early, if I remember right. But that was when we first introduced the Take Me Home program, the 5-year plan. And to me, it really stood out when they said that people living out in the encampment is not a dignified way to live, whether they realize it or not. It's not. And it's also not safe. It's not sanitary. Not just for them, but the water's there, the riverbed is there. And so, with that said, I'm glad that, we're doing something about it. I really would like to see, a plan, more structure. Like, if this does go through, what are we gonna do? What does the day-to-day property management look like? Who's gonna pay for the utilities? I don't know if, when you say we, does that mean the county's also gonna help us to pay for utilities and, different programs, or just the basics that you need to run a facility like that, maybe landscaping, if there's landscaping, different things. Trying to think what else.
And I probably should clarify, and I apologize that I didn't. I think the idea is the grant would cover the cost of whatever services are provided, and the county would oversee the grant. We would be a partner in, providing some of the support we already do, which is public safety.
So these modular units, they look fairly small. Is this going to be something that's open to families? Because I know that unfortunately we do have some families that stay sometimes in their vehicles, like in their vans, in our shopping centers. Is this going to be open to them, or is this only for single individuals or couples?
Yeah, so the idea is for the families that we would actually we would have funding set aside to put them directly into housing. Because they're pretty housable, but that if option, the Los Coches option was chosen, we would have that set up for individuals and couples, because it's not really, like you said, suitable for families.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think another just general concern that I have is that if I recall correctly, I think about a year ago when we had all that flooding going on down there, I want to say almost every city council member went down there at one point or another to offer food services, blankets, or whatnot. And I recall that back then, I think we were down to like only 7 or 8 individuals that were living there at the riverbed, and now I believe we're up to 30. So that's something, I guess, that to me is a concern. Also, I don't understand why the growth that happened, but I guess that'll be in the census. Once that comes up, we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually done some, through the chair, I'm sorry, I'm just jumping in. We have done some outreach, not just Che, but also the police department and fire department. And there's some people that came from Greenfield after the Caltrans cleanup occurred. And there's some people that came from Salinas What my understanding is they came from industrial because of not feeling safe there, a handful of people. So, I think it's about 8 to 10 people that may have come from other places, but the rest, I think, are, local, and I could defer to the, chief of police if that's his understanding of roughly what we're talking about in terms of people from Salinas and Greenfield.
And Megan, too, just to clarify, there is that point in time, council, I know we're gonna have updated numbers on the 31st. So I'm planning on, I registered to be part of the count on that day to ensure we have, at least for me, I have a proper kind of information in terms of who we're seeing out in the riverbed and other areas of our city. So I encourage the council, if they will wish to participate in that, that is open as well.
Yeah, and what the city manager said was correct. Some of these folks are being displaced from other locations, and they're finding their way down to us, and we're running into quite a few folks from Salinas, and the folks that were displaced from Greenfield. So they're mixing with our local residents down there, and they're kind of, it's getting to the point where they're kind of separating themselves into different little groups down there. So we have our folks, and then we have the Greenfield folks off to themselves, and then the Salinas folks off to themselves. So it's kind of a mix, as they're being displaced from someplace else, they come here.
I was gonna say also, Megan, is there a way that we could prioritize our Soledad homeless individuals when we get the modular units? Like, is that something that we can do where we prioritize our residents, our unsheltered residents versus?
Yeah, I mean, it would be the county. I think our intention is to get to get a census and to work with all of the individuals. And so there might be some people from Greenfield or King City or perhaps Salinas, maybe in the temporary housing, but the benefit is we might also get access to resources in Salinas or in King City for those individuals. There's, maybe some of the people, for example, Salinas operates an emergency motel program. Maybe some of the Salinas folks we can, or the county, I should say, could fund them to be in that area. Same with Greenfield. We can look at ways. We have to look at the encampment as a whole and work with the encampment as a whole, but it also gives us the opportunity to work with those jurisdictions to get resources for residents that may be from there and want to go back. That sometimes many of them do want to be back in that area that they're from because they have those connections.
And probably the decision's gonna be made at a different level, but as far as we're concerned, the health and safety of the folks down there, that's I think our main concern. And we might wanna start with the most vulnerable, whether they be from King City, Greenfield, whatever, moving them out first, especially before the weather really hits and the rain really hits and all that kind of stuff. So that would be my preference would be to start with the most vulnerable and work our way up from there.
I think for me, I just want to say thank you for bringing this forward. I know there's obviously a lot of concerns anytime you come. I mean, we've heard this over and over with housing and homelessness, right? People want it, but we just don't want it in our backyard, or we just don't want that to happen here. I know when I came to this council several years ago as a city councilwoman, we already had people living in the river. And I remember the first time I went out there to talk to the people in the river, and I was really horrified, and more for me that as a citizen, I wasn't aware that this was happening just in our area, and even though it's not within our jurisdiction, it still impacts our city services and our resources, and the calls for services that we get in our businesses, right? So I think it's imperative that we really look at it as, how do we partner with the county to be able to address this? Because it is, as Chief said, a matter of health and safety, and I think that should be our priority, whether it's one person or whether it's 30, every person deserves the same dignified type of housing. So for me, I want to say thank you for bringing it to us and giving us options. When we adopted the plan for the Leave Me Home that the county had put together, I think the concept was that we would adopt a plan, we would review some of those elements that were specific of how can we partner, what can we do. And this gives us an opportunity to be able to look at a funding source. We don't even know whether that funding source will be, awarded to our city or not. But I think for us, it's important as leaders to be able to look at opportunities that we have to address some of these concerns. And we wouldn't be taking away money from our residents and meeting the needs of our residents because it's not coming from our general fund budget. It's coming from a funding source that's available now, may not be available later, given some of the, as Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, there is a deficit of 38 billion at the state level, and housing and homelessness is on one of those budget cuts, right? So I think if we have this funding source, being able to look at what can we do until we find that viable long-term solution for our residents. And I'll just share for me, and having talked to many of them, we have more, as was mentioned, we have a lot of families. We have a lot of families with children that are living in their cars, and they're just, a car away from being homeless and living out in the river as well. And many of the residents, there may be one or two that may not want the help, but I think the majority are. And I think my concern also, as we're coming to start the agriculture season here, what I saw before, and the people that I've talked to in the past, they're working. They have a car, but live in a river because they can't afford to live here. But they have a car and they go to work and they come back and they live in the river. And I think those folks would take the help and I believe it's important to prioritize also the most vulnerable as well. So, but this gives us an opportunity to be able to look at what can we do. We've had multiple workshops, we've had multiple surveys, and a lot of our residents are expecting us to be able to try to do something. Before we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the budget, we were looking at what can we do. Now we have an opportunity to look at a funding source that can give us a potential solution. And it's now deciding, which of those solutions that are presented to us is the most viable in terms of what we want to see happen, and helping people to get to where they need to be and to really, live a dignified life in terms of their housing stability. And making sure that we're being part of the solution and not part of the challenge. So for me, I think in terms of the recommendations that were presented, I would like to see kind of us moving forward with option 2, which looks at Los Cochis property only because it is temporary. And I know in terms of the long-term sustainability of housing, we can't do long-term sustainability of housing because that's not what it's zoned for. In the meantime, as we're growing our commercial and retail, we've seen some of these properties have been there for years, and there has not been much going on. So I think it gives us an opportunity. We don't get tied down to the property because we're not saying we're going to utilize it. And I don't anticipate that in a year, hopefully we will find someone, but I don't anticipate with these properties that have been there for many, many years vacant, that we try to do something with the property that has been there long-standing for years and nothing has happened, to see how we can utilize our property with the proper mechanisms to be able to ensure that the safety and welfare of those residents, but also of our residents and the perimeters are also taken into account, and that we're factoring that in as we're looking at this specific property. My only question in terms of the recommendation on option number 2 is, once we have because it's not permanent, like how long can that be temporary until we find the housing? And this obviously, when we talk about homelessness, this also comes with wraparound services, right? So it's not just housing, it's all these other services that are important to those individuals. So my question on that would be, what is the time frame for us to be able to support these families, get them out of the river, and then transition them into permanent housing or other type of housing that's suitable for them. So those are my comments, and my question. So Roxanne, I know you had your hand up before, so do you want to go ahead and provide comments on some of the items that you heard from our council members?
Sure, absolutely. It is a normal practice in homeless services for us to consider the vulnerability of individuals and make sure that they get priority for the programs and services that we're offering. So we can absolutely implement that practice into this project. There's also, one of the things that a report had recently come out on is when you significantly reduce the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness, in general, crime does go down in that surrounding area. So as soon as I can find that report, I'll be happy to forward it to Megan so she can share with the council on some of those findings and how it has had positive impacts on the needs for city services like police and fire. The tiny villages, there's been a lot of developments in the structures, and one of the product that we're using on the project that we have in partnership with the County of Santa Cruz, or Pajaro, those ones have high fire ratings. It's the highest that is available in the industry. I can't guarantee that that's the product that we would use because we would clearly have to go through the RFP process, but that is something we would take into serious consideration when selecting the products. I would also like to say that the product that we're using in the Santa Cruz County partnership is they have a 20-year lifespan. We would probably fund about 2.5 years of operations because it does take time for us to do the RFP and find the developer and everything of that sort. But that, of course, does include services and also extends on into possibly rental assistance for individuals to help transition them into the lifestyle of having to pay rent again. The products that we are proposing in option 2 are movable. We would work with the city to identify like ownership of those units, and if the city were to determine that you wanted to keep those units, you could clearly use them for anything that you need to use them for in the future, so that's something for you to take into consideration. The alternate option is if the county were to own them, we could remove them. And of course, that would be included in the budget, the final expenses for moving them. Finally, something that is good to mention is since I've gotten to the county, I've really started implementing the good neighbor policy practice. So that is essentially when the organization that we hire to operate, they have a policy on how they address neighborhood concerns, how they work with individuals so they're not camping within a certain range of their unit, the program site, and also like just how are they going to create community groups with the neighbors so that they have open communication and they're aware when any of their clients are allegedly, causing issues in the community. So I do hope that answered all of your questions, and again, I'm still here if you have any further.
Thank you, Roxanne. So just in terms of the properties, because I want to make sure this is clear, the property restrictions then would be for a period of, you have operation costs to fund for 2.5 years, so would it be a 2 to 3 year timeframe commitment?
That is correct. The ERF is a 3-year grant.
Okay.
And we have not identified any funding sources that would be able to keep the project alive past those 3 years.
Okay.
Through the chair, if I may, for Roxanne. Roxanne, on option 3, tell me the option with that one, as far as the funding and getting them into places that are livable right away. And then secondly, you had mentioned about permanent housing. My experience has been we worked with the county, with the housing authority to get them on the list, and I don't know if you sound as though that there will be funding also for permanent housing?
Yes, there are several different types of permanent housing interventions that we would introduce as a possible outcome for folks. There are special vouchers called the homeless set-aside vouchers, which only authorized organizations can have access to. So we would work with the coalition and the housing authority to get our selected provider eligible to use those vouchers. There's also CalAIM, which is a gigantic state initiative with billions of dollars that is helping with rental assistance for up to 6 months for individuals who are qualified and on Medi-Cal. So there's and clearly the regular housing authority pipeline, there's permanent supportive housing projects that are popping up. We have behavioral health bridge housing, which is getting built in Marina for those who are too acute and require further mental health assistance. The county is currently have an RFP out, so that we're hoping to open that up within the upcoming months as well. So yeah, there's lots of options, and I'm very positive I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, it's getting late, but I'm encouraged that we can help the vast majority of folks that's in there, and I think the big thing is that they do want it. If they didn't want it, we would have walked away and moved on, because there's several other encampments within the county that we could be focusing on.
Excellent. And one other question, so with the option 3, wouldn't that be the quickest route into getting them into some type of, housing or it's lack of housing, but apartment or a hotel room? Wouldn't that be quicker, and we could prioritize those that need most, the families and those type, quicker than waiting to, once we get the funding, waiting to go out to bid for an RFP and then for building of these structures?
That is correct. I think option number 3 would likely be the fastest one, but as we mentioned, we would want some motel vouchers in there. The weather has clearly been not very nice to us, so we just want to make sure that we have options for folks when there's inclement weather.
Inclement weather? Yes, and then also that would also include the wraparound services at those facilities as well, right? It could still be provided with a case manager. Is that correct, Roxanne?
Oh, I'm back, sorry, my computer froze. Yes, it would include wraparound services, housing navigation, rental assistance, quite a few other services.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. And Roxanne, just my questions in regards to option 2, it would include the same, right? We still have the wraparound services, we still have access to the housing navigation, with the exception of the vouchers, right? Because those wouldn't be needed. But my experience with the vouchers, and I know they come far and few between, and I know even for obviously it's inclement weather is pretty defined in terms of when that's gonna happen, but we've had incidents where they're limited and to those vouchers. And if we're talking about vouchers, that means that you'd secure vouchers from our existing motels, so you'd enter into those contracts with those motels for those units to be available when the vouchers are needed. And I mean, I guess just my concern in terms of when those would be available and if they would be available, given that 80 to 85% of our hotels, the 2 that we have, are fully occupied, 80 to 85% of the time.
Yeah, the hard part about vouchers is how quickly we would have to move to execute an agreement with the hotel. There's also the issue, I don't think any of us like closing the doors and saying, okay, your 5 days is up, you have to go back outside. So there's certainly some cons with using temporary vouchers, but I think that just becomes the question of like where are we prioritizing our limited resources.
Thank you, Roxanne. And then I have just another question, because you're right in terms of the temporary vouchers. I've had experiences where I think, many of the people that I come in contact with do live here. And I know I have to say thank you to Liberty Chapel, because they've supported with giving vouchers to families that have needed the assistance. But again, I think, you know, the hard piece for me is that the resources are limited. So even if we say, hey, we're gonna have these other resources under option 3, I've had experience with families where I've had to tell them, go to the Salinas Navigation Center, and we're calling like, you know, all the different providers in the county to look for housing, and there is no availability. And even most recently with some of families that were living in a car, the resources that were available were, you know, most of the places that I called, especially those shelters for families up in the Monterey area, they were busy. I mean, they were packed and they weren't taking any more people. And so for me, it's you know, what is the solution that's going to provide our families with an opportunity to get housed, get the help that they need, and get them out of those circumstances so they don't have to no longer be there. And I think for me, the option 2 presents that opportunity because we don't have to be relying on other resources to be available. The Navigation Center, I mean, you guys did an amazing job, but that's packed. The other center in Salinas was packed when we called. The other center in Monterey, the women's gathering, the women's place for gathering, which is a really, you know, family location as well. All those places were full, and they couldn't take our families. So it's having to say to our families that have children. And for me as a mother, it was really hard to look at the moms with a 12-month-old baby and others with a three-year-old baby and a 12-year-old daughter and saying, I'm sorry, but we don't have any resources that are available to house you currently. You have to continue to be living under these circumstances. So, I mean, for me, I think we have an opportunity as a council to be able to look at options that are that are going to be viable and that we can be part of the solution and not necessarily having to rely on some of the other resources that are very scarce throughout our county. So option 2 for me would be the recommendation.
Through the chair, I just had a question for Roxanne. I did have a motel owner who reached out to me during the holidays. And they were actually asking me if I knew about vouchers because they wanted to assist some of the unsheltered population. And they told me that they have worked before with the Housing Resource Center, but that when they called to inquire, they were told that I guess it wasn't cold enough. I don't know if there has to be like a temperature, certain degrees in order to activate the referrals. But there is, definitely local interest, but, I just wanted to ask that. But again, I do think that we need a permanent solution, and I do realize that the referrals that we get or the vouchers that we get are usually just for a couple of days.
Yes, the inclement weather vouchers that are through the Department of Social Services but managed by the coalition, it has to be 45 degrees or colder plus the chance of rain. So should the council want us to explore option 3, we would have to define what inclement weather means to us and what's the ranges and what's the time frame in which we're willing to keep people inside of.
Through the chair, Roxanne, and so we would be in control of that though, we'd be the ones issuing that, and we'd create that criteria, and those were one of the critical things that we could establish that ensure that we could raise that ceiling so that it'd be easier to obtain it, and we're in control of it, so that's a good part. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that comment. I think option 2 gives us a control as well, and the vouchers, then it wouldn't be, I want to agree with Councilwoman Corralejo that this provides us, option 2 provides us with more of a permanent solution to be able to still be in control, but also be able to ensure that within that 2 to 3 year time frame, hopefully we can eliminate those individuals from going back into the riverbed, and that we wouldn't have that anymore. And looking at, continuing to look at options, how we have resources available. I think for me, what I've learned in my last several years of trying to assist with getting resources to our homeless individuals is the lack of resources. and the lack of resources when people need it. And again, the voucher situation that is not permanent, it's only temporary, and people are back out. And if they can't find a permanent solution, then they're back out in the river again, and they're back out homeless again. And that includes children. And so for me is option 2 provides that permanent solution to be able to look at a sustainable, at least for the 2 to 5 year, 3 year process of this grant, to be able to ensure that we're housing those that need to be housed, and that we're also at the same time looking at long-term solutions that we can implement to be able to ensure that this doesn't continue to grow in our city. So my recommendation is option 2, and I do want to just, my final thought is, I know I had asked previously before to have, in terms of the budget impacts, so the council could really understand what those budget impacts are in terms of what we currently have with our homelessness, is that I know the City of Salinas does a categorization when they go out for calls for services, whether it be police or fire, when it's related to our homeless encampments. And so I wanted to see if there's a possibility that we do the same, or have we done that? I know Chief, obviously, and his team have been excellent in going out there. They have been for many, many years, assisting the homeless and giving out, jackets, giving out, resources, toiletries, and everything that's needed. But I also know they've been impacted in the calls for services. And so I think for me is, I want to make sure that the council understands the financial impact that we have as well. So if we can document that and provide a budget impact in terms of the calls for services. So, for me, I think the option 2 is really providing more of a sustainable, permanent solution to address the encampment situation that I have. And that's my recommendation. Obviously, we have some different, different views on this item. But I think for me, going back, to make sure that those individuals, and plus some of those families that we have that, as I said, are living in their cars and living with children in their cars, that's unacceptable, inexcusable for us to have an opportunity to do something. And it's like, where can we agree so that we can support the families that need it?
Question here for procedural is, can we move forward with 2 options? Is that possible? And for them to look at for funding, that way we provide something,
I think
put
we
us
have,
on the list?
yeah, I mean, and Roxanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to have a specific program that we put forward through the ERF. Because there's also a budget that goes along, and each of these are gonna have, the resources are gonna be in different buckets depending on what option is, obviously.
So no.
So I would say no, but let Roxanne, if I'm overstepping.
No, you are correct. We will need to explain in detail what our plan is. And having a very clear pathway to permanent housing, really prioritizing the health and safety of the individuals is what's gonna move our project to the top of the funding list.
And I think, just to add, I think either 3 options for the interim housing, we think we can put together a great proposal, whatever is the desire of council.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So council, yes, we want to move this along. So, obviously, if we're going to have a successful application, even though we have 3 different options, there is going to be, scrutinizing in terms of what is the option that is providing more of that permanent solution to the housing, to the homeless situation. And I think option 3 doesn't get us there because it doesn't give us that permanent solution. Option 2 does. So for me, I recommend moving forward with providing something for option 2 and coming back. I know it's due February 1st, so we obviously are in a time crunch in order to make this happen. But I would recommend, and I know we're not making a motion, right? Are we making a motion?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking for,
direction.
or
Looking for
actually,
direction?
Mike is saying,
Yeah, actually, I just want to make sure that direction, provide staff and direction for the purposes of sustainable. I mean,
you're giving direction, but that direction is gonna be acted upon, right? And so you are essentially, you're taking action.
Okay, so,
Sorry, through the chair, I do have a question for staff and perhaps for Roxanne as well. If we move forward with I guess with the recommendation today as a council, are we able to later change, like if we get input for our community? Because I do feel honestly like it's a little bit rushed, and I would love to get the input, not just from the community, but from the unsheltered folk themselves. And they have gone before to our workshops. And I, really would have loved to have had their input. Is that something, or whatever we put on this grant proposal is set in stone and we have to follow?
Yeah, and I might have Roxanne answer that. I think generally we're fleshing out what the grant is. There might be some things that could be added through engagement, like whether, security or fencing or other things that may not be spelled out. But I don't know, Roxanne, maybe you're better equipped to answer than I.
I am a huge advocate of involving people who would be participants in the program and really getting an understanding of their needs, and as we develop the program and flesh it out some more, so absolutely. And I also do think it is appropriate for us to do community engagement. What we could, I'm trying to think, this is the problem with a lot of the state grants, is they move super, super fast. So I suppose we could, we would definitely do community engagement. I'm just trying to think of like the best strategy to ensure that people don't feel like we're just throwing it at them and the decisions have been made, but also giving an opportunity for them to engage and be a part of the process as well.
Roxanne, with that, if we can have, I know we obviously don't, I think one of the things for the council to consider is that this application is due February 1st.
Yeah.
Right, it's due February 1st, so we don't have a lot of that additional time, but as the grant is being submitted and we can start doing some additional comments and engagement. But I just want to say in terms of, there has been community engagement, so it's not, not in terms of this specific project, but there has been community engagement and lived experience, right? I think one of the criteria that we talk about is not just having residents, our residents, but also the residents that are impacted, to be able to provide feedback to the council, and that has been done in multiple ways. So I just want to make sure that we understand that it's not like there has been discussions about the impacts of our homeless population, and there has been discussions, there has been workshops, community workshops, where we actually had a good representative of our community, plus our lived experience folks that live out in the encampment. So I just want to make sure I clarify that, because I think there has been, and I think what we've heard, and part of what Megan and the report says is, what I've heard, and I participated in the majority of those, has been, we need to do something, what can we do? And housing has been one of the big priorities in terms of the homeless conversation is, obviously the need for services, but on top of that has floated up, we need housing, we need permanent housing. So I think in that feedback in terms of what has been discussed already and what the council has done this past year, we have engaged. But if there's an opportunity to look at, hey, if we move forward, how do we continue to do that? And imperative, but we can't do that before February 1st, I guess. If that's what the council wants to say, hey, we're gonna do a workshop next week, is that even feasible or possible? I guess it can be, but how many people would we really engage, and what are we looking, what kind of feedback are we looking for? Feedback on option 1, 2, or 3, or I think that's.
Through the chair.
Yeah, so let me just finish, so anyways, those are my comments in terms of what we're here today with this opportunity. Again, I'm just gonna say this last comment is an opportunity for us based on already some of the discussions that we've heard from our stakeholders, from our community, from the adoption of the plan, we didn't have any funding. I know it was really hard for us to figure out what we needed. I've always advocated for a shelter with children and families because South County really needs more of them. But now we have an opportunity to be able to have a temporary solution that's going to get us to a permanent solution for housing. And for me, you know, I want to continue to move forward with option 2 and then looking at if there's opportunity for more engagement.
Yeah, so my question, Mayor, is that, presenting those ideas, because to the homeless and to the people in that area that saying, you know, what are you guys looking at, 1, 2, or 3? What is your preference? And that way we get input from them as well and we move forward together. I think if we could do that and do it quickly, and because the response has been what you've just said, the response has been there, do we need housing? I looked at the survey, took the survey as well, and so it wasn't really specific to the town, but to the county, right? To, you know, what's needed in South County, do you think housing's needed, do you think? So now we have narrowed it down to some specific ideas, and like Councilmember Orlando said, then it's thrust upon us here on the 17th, and without really having an opportunity to digest it, and having to move forward, and we gotta have it by February 1st, otherwise we're out of luck. And I don't think no one on this council wants to miss this opportunity, we just wanna make sure that we address it appropriately.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So with that said, I want to make sure that we don't miss this opportunity because, you know, we obviously want more engagement. I know we are on the 17th today, so what is the time frame to be able to put together the application, Roxanne? So that way, I mean, I just wanted to make sure council also understands there is also an application process, so it's not just, hey, we're having a community meeting next week, and then the application is due the following week, because there is a process for the grant to be submitted and information to be collected. So what is your timeline, Roxanne and Megan, to be able to, if we were to have a community meeting next week, would that be feasible? And then what's the timeline that you need to be able to move forward to prepare the grant documents and submit it on a timely manner? Would we meet the February 1st deadline?
Unfortunately not, as you had mentioned, Mayor, I have to go to my board of supervisors. In order for us to get approval to apply, we would want to have a dollar amount of budget strategy drafted, and our timelines is everything needs to be routed for agenda on the 24th for me to get to the 30th meeting.
Okay, yeah, so I knew there was gonna be the time constraints, so, yeah, so council, again, I mean, here's an opportunity for us to do something. It might not be exactly the fix that we want, but we do have an opportunity to take advantage, and hopefully we get funded, right? We don't even know whether the funds would come in or not. We hope that we apply and that we do have a strong application and that we would be able to get funded. It's not a permanent solution. I mean, it's a permanent solution to housing, but it's not a permanent in terms of securing that piece of land that's not going to be, that's not going to be restricted for its use, for future. It's only within that 2 to 3 year time frame. And then if hopefully we get everybody housed and we don't need that anymore, then we don't need to continue with that. So for me, council, I think option 2 is what presents a more temporary in terms of restricting the zoning and the location, but also a permanent source of trying to house the people that we do have in the encampments.
Through the chair, I had a question for staff. Do we have any requirements when it comes to public notices to the surrounding, I guess there are, that I'm aware of, 2 residential homes in that area within 1,500 feet with 2 families. There's one that's probably the closest one to the 990 property is a family of 4, I believe, with young children, pretty young children. Is there any kind of obligation when it comes to notices that we would have to, as a city, provide to them prior to pushing this through?
I might defer to Mike, but my understanding is we allow for kind of emergency shelter in this particular zone now with the recent change. And therefore, it's really a by right kind of use, but I think Roxanne mentioned that as a good neighbor policy, if we end up with option 2, we would go out and engage the nearby residents and see what we could do to, mitigate or, make sure that there's minimal impact on nearby residents. So that would be something that we would do, and I don't know, Mike, if that's
I
your.
think that's correct.
So that's as a result of the zoning changes that we approved as a council last.
Yeah, and actually, it's state law. State law has required that jurisdictions, and indeed in our housing element, we have to identify places for emergency shelter. That would be by right.
Okay, council, so we need to move on.
Well, with that, Mayor, then, if I may, I'll offer a motion to go ahead and move forward with option 3.
Okay, so I thought we're not doing a motion. I thought it's a recommendation, so,
You have to have,
I mean,
your rules say that any action of the council has to be by way of 3 individuals, right? So it has to be supported by 3. So you have to have a consensus, even if you're just providing direction as to, yes, we want to partner up, and
a consensus of 3, we don't have a consensus of 3.
that's what I mean. So we need a consensus of 3 in order to make this work.
Okay, so council, we are not gonna have a consensus of 3. Obviously, I'm supportive of option 2, provided with, I don't wanna restate my reasons why I think this is a better option, in terms of permanent solution for our housing. And so I think we need to come to an agreement, if we wanna take advantage of this and really looking at how do we make sure that we too as a council come to consensus on what's in the best interest of our community and our residents that need the support and the help out in the encampment. More of a permanent solution. I think for me, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, I understand your concerns and, in terms of option 2 and really wanting to make sure that we don't tie up our land for future. But I think option 2 gives us the opportunity not to tie it up for permanent, right? But gives us a 2 to 3 year time frame to be able to look at how do we provide the permanent housing to these folks that is needed with the wraparound services, with, all the other services that come along with, supporting our homeless population to really get out of homelessness. So with that, we need a consensus to be able to move forward, because if we don't do that tonight, Megan, then we lose the opportunity to apply for the grant. As Roxanne said, obviously I want to thank Roxanne also for coming and giving us this opportunity. I know that you work closely with, I know you were working on the Encampment Resolution Grant last year that the city of Pajaro received. And I know, the opportunities for us weren't there because that was more of the emergency that was needed, but here's another opportunity under round 3. And I know for us in South County, we keep saying we don't have the resources, we don't have, the county is not supporting us, and so here is, we have the county supporting, we have an opportunity to bring the resources, we have an opportunity not just to bring the resources, but to really truly permanently house the people that are homeless in our area. And whether it's people from Soledad or in our South County region, I think that's really important for us to really take that into consideration, that there is an opportunity and there is a solution that's being presented to us tonight. And it's, our duty as council members, I know it's not easy, but it's our duty as council members to make sure that we take on these opportunities that are presented to us, even if it's at the last minute, right? We want to take advantage of the money that's available because we don't have the money. We don't have our general fund money. We'll never have that kind of money to be able to set aside for that.
And through the chair, if I may, with that said, then, I'm willing to move forward with option 3 and take advantage of that and provide housing and provide a place for them to get them off the riverbed, to get them into healthy situations, to help them start progressing to to permanent housing, for us to meet that need and help with the other housing that we're bringing on as well. We have an opportunity to do that, whether it's, if you know, it just doesn't have to be option 2. There's also option 3 that we could do that can meet those needs too. So, with that said, we have an opportunity to do this. Whether we have a consensus on that, I'm saying we can address it.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think, we can go on forever, right? So we have to decide. I think for me, option 2 is, it is quicker, but it's motel vouchers, and those are not gonna accommodate forever, and that's not a permanent solution. And so that doesn't get us to the permanent solution that we're looking for, where option 2 gives us that opportunity to be able to have the resources, the housing that's there. As I mentioned, and I shared my story with the community because I've talked to many of the homeless individuals and tried to get the resources, and what we have available, even through the motel vouchers, is, again, 80 to 85% of our motel units are occupied the majority of the time, and the motel vouchers are vouchers. They're not a permanent source of trying to get people into permanent housing. And we don't have that opportunity, so I think this gives us a 2-year time frame to be able to take the opportunity to say, we have a solution, this is what we're gonna do, and then working with other resources in the county to say, how do we make sure that we don't have more people that are becoming homeless, and that we try to, I know people say we're gonna eradicate homelessness, and sometimes you say that's kind of naive, right? But I think for us, under option 2, we can take the people that we have in the river and be able to provide them with a permanent solution, long-term permanent solution for housing.
Can we put the 3 options back up on the screen again, just so that we make sure that we're all in the same place with respect to what those 3 options offer?
And Roxanne, I do have, I don't know if this would split hairs or if this would be helpful, but through the chair, I'm wondering if we could even structure something like we would be working on option 3 first, because option 2 is gonna take time anyhow to establish. And if we're not as successful in housing people with option 3, we would work towards option 2. I don't know if that's an option that we could clarify in the application, if that makes sense. If we go back to option 3, the idea would be we would actually just directly, permanently house people from the encampment, which we were planning on doing anyhow with option 2. We were going to take the low-hanging fruit and see if we could get the rental subsidies and get, especially the families, to get them housed. But option 2, we felt like was a good option because it may take some time, but even setting up option 2, it's not gonna be quick. It's gonna take maybe 12 months to get option 2 going anyhow. I don't know, Roxanne, if that makes sense as a kind of a strategy?
Yes, it absolutely does. We can theoretically have everyone in the encampment assessed and for us to get an understanding of their acuity levels. And then we can make assumptions that a certain number of individuals we think we can house directly from the encampment, and we could theoretically reduce the footprint of the structures. Maybe not having enough units for everyone, but having enough units to serve the most vulnerable. That may take a little bit more time for us to find housing options for.
Yeah, thank you, Roxanne,
So,
for
yeah,
that. So I
So
think,
the idea would be a hybrid of the 2?
Yeah.
You think, Roxanne, if you get creative, that you would be able to create some sort of hybrid that would allow sort of a combo of the interest that the council has expressed in both options 2 and 3?
Absolutely, that is doable.
Thank you, Roxanne. So I think we have consensus from the council then that the hybrid would work with the option 3 and the option 2. And then that would reduce, hopefully if option 3 is successful, then we would reduce the print of option 2. Okay, okay, and would that still get us hopefully a successful application, given that it's a hybrid of both, which I think is actually better than, one or
Yeah, I
three?
actually think it makes it very,
Yeah,
sorry,
okay.
Chair.
No, go ahead.
I actually think it makes it even more competitive of a application.
So then, just to make sure that we're clear, the third direction is, yes, we want to partner, and 2, we want to have the grant present a sort of a hybrid of options 2 and 3 together, sort of work with one another, so that the transitional housing, the actual footprint may be able to be reduced based on the success of moving forward with option 3.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Megan.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you for that. Yeah, and I really want to also thank you, Roxanne, for the incredible work that you do.
Thank you.
And thank you to the council also for the dialogue that we have. Obviously, each one of us is pretty passionate about the things that we feel are important. So I'm glad that we're able to come to a resolution. So with that, then you have direction to be able to move with what was just mentioned. Okay, perfect. Thank you, council. Okay, so with